Okay, we're back with the exciting video number 3 in this series. Okay, we've just learned about simple sentences. Okay, let's review. The first time we learned about clauses and the different types of clauses, independent clauses, dependent clauses. Then we moved on to types of sentences and we looked at simple sentences, which contain just one independent clause. Then we moved on to compound sentences where we have 2 independent clauses and we join them together in one of 3 ways. In video 2, we looked at the first of the 3 ways. That was independent clause, comma, fanboys, independent clause. This is your bread and butter, which means your most common way that you will join 2 independent clauses. Comma, fanboys appears many, many times throughout any page of writing. But there are 2 other ways that are less common, but nice to have in your arsenal, in your collection of tools that you can use as a writer. So here's the second one. Independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. This is the first time we're seeing this semicolon. What is a semicolon? It's a special punctuation mark. It goes in the same place that a period goes. That's one of the tests. And that makes sense because if you think about it, an independent clause can be a sentence by itself. So you can almost imagine here we put a period there. Yeah, independent clause period. That makes sense. And then we would have a capital letter here for a new independent clause. However, a semicolon doesn't finish the sentence. It keeps the sentence alive with a bit of a pause and then continues with another independent clause. So you can always test to see if this is a good place for a semicolon by just substituting a period and seeing if it makes sense. What's different about a semicolon than a period is that, as I said, it keeps the sentence alive. And it also shows that the 2 clauses have a really close connection between each other. And that's why you don't want to put a period. A period might divide it. So we want to put a semicolon to hold the sentence together. Let's look at an example here. Okay, how's this for an example? I lost my job, my cat, and my bike in one day. Semicolon. The universe seemed to think that I needed to learn how to deal with personal loss. Okay, so this is a complete thing. We can call it an independent clause. And so is this one. The universe seemed. So that's subject verb. And I think there's a very close relationship between these 2. These are all the things that happened to me. And then this seemed to be my impression of those events of that day. As we move on down here, so there are 4 main types of relationships between these 2 clauses. I told you that they're closely connected, and it's usually in one of 4 ways, and the first 3 are the most common. So let's go through these. A would be cause, semicolon, effect. Okay, so for an example like that, you could say something like, Bob broke, subject verb, we have an independent clause, semicolon. He never played, subject verb. Can you see how that first one, the breaking of his leg in 4 places, caused the second one? He never played football again. I think that's pretty clear. And those 2 are obviously very closely related. So that's a very common way that we can use just a semicolon. Here's a second one. Effect, semicolon, cause. It's very interesting because there are no words here, no transitional words that guide the reader as to the relationship between the 2 clauses. The reader has to read this clause, read that clause, and then put together the information logically. And so here's another way that that can happen. Effect, semicolon, cause. I walked into the kitchen and screamed. You're wondering, why did he scream? What happened? What caused that? My cat was eating my sandwich. Okay, shocking. Yeah, no wonder I screamed. Okay, so here we go. We have the effect, the screaming, and the cause, which is my cat eating my sandwich. That's what caused the scream. Okay, so again, we can see that this follows our rules for independent clauses. Can you imagine if I put a period here, though? What if I put a period and then I started with a capital M? It would sound strangely disconnected. I walked into the kitchen and screamed, period. My cat was eating my sandwich. Those aren't unrelated. In other words, they are very related. And it feels like it should be held together. So I would put a semicolon there before I would put a period. Okay, let's look at a third one here. I told you there were 4, so here's the third one. I'm going to call this A equals A. In other words, sort of a restating of the same idea. You say the same thing twice. I guess I shouldn't put an equal, I should put a semicolon there. But it's the two ideas equal each other. Imagine something like this. Okay. Very dramatic. I hated school when I was a child, semicolon. Every day in that prison felt like a day spent in hell. If you look at the two sides, we're going to call this independent. That could be a sentence, right? Semicolon, every day in that prison, subject, felt, verb. So we have 2 independent clauses. You can clearly see that both clauses talk about the same idea. In this case, I hated school when I was a child. And then every day in that prison, school, felt like a day spent in hell. And that's the hated part. This is often used when the writer wants to add a little bit of style to the message. Often the first time you say the information, it's pretty straight. I hated school when I was a child. Okay, that is pretty straight. It's easy to understand. Now that I know you understand my message, I have a chance to go and be a little bit more poetic with it. So this uses a metaphor, school as prison, and hell is this place that I hated. So you can be more descriptive with the second sentence there. I think it's a really nice chance to put your own style into your writing. All right, so then there's the fourth way. I told you there were 4. And I would say like A, contrast, B. In this case, I guess your semicolon is in here. This is where you're saying that the two sides contrast each other. And that's not such an easy connection for the reader to make in many cases. So when we do it this way, we often want to set up the 2 independent clauses so that they have a very similar structure. Okay, so let's look at an example here. Canadian students often give their best effort in university, semicolon. Asian students tend to work hardest in high school. Okay, I think that's true from what my students have told me in my own personal experience. So let's look at that. These two are very clearly comparable. We can contrast these two things. We have Canadians and we have Asians. We have best effort in university, best effort in high school. So the two sides very easily can be compared. And in that situation, I think that the semicolon by itself could be used because the reader can easily figure out what's going on here, right? All right, so those are the 4 main relationships that we can demonstrate using just a semicolon. One thing that's interesting about just using a semicolon is I think it's a more dramatic writing structure than comma fanboys for 2 reasons. One of them is that a semicolon gives the reader a pause. It's a natural pause. If we go up and look at this one, for example, Bob broke his leg in 4 places. He never played football again, right? There is a pause there, and that pause allows a little bit of tension to rise in the mind of the reader. They're wondering what happened next or what was the result of that. So Bob broke his leg in 4 places. if we wanted to, we could put a comma so, comma fanboys. But that isn't as dramatic. There's no pause there. It's very smooth. Bob broke his leg in 4 places, so he never played football again. Right? It's all very clearly stated to the reader. There's no pause there. There's no time for drama to rise. So I think it's not as impactful as just using a semicolon. Also, a second reason why a semicolon can be a little more dramatic is that the reader has to figure out the connection between the clauses. So again, as you can see, there are 4 major types of connections that we could have, and the reader has to read the first part, read the second part, and in their own mind, they have to do some work and figure out the connection. So I think that both of those reasons make semicolons, when they're used like this, a little bit more dramatic. The one last note here is that as a result, it's dramatic. You shouldn't overuse semicolons like this. They're supposed to be special. So how about that? Semicolon. They're supposed to be special. There we go. I think that's the reason, the cause, and this is the effect. If I made this a capital Y, this would be a proper sentence. You shouldn't overuse semicolons like this. Semicolon. They're supposed to be special. All right. So anyway, I hope that helps. That's our 3rd video wrapping up. When I come back for my 4th video, we will look into the last type of compound connector. This was our 2nd today. And we'll look at the next one in our next video. Okay. See you then.